The first breath Ilara took was a gasp of sorrow, mirrored by the dying forest around her, a realm where colossal trees now strained for a sky they could no longer reach. Her dark skin, a stark contrast to the pale, revered elves of Eldoria, marked her as an anomaly from birth, a living testament to a heritage whispered about with disdain. Abandoned to the fringes of their society, she knew only the biting wind of prejudice and the suffocating embrace of loneliness. Each day was a quiet battle against the encroaching blight that mimicked the desolation in her soul, stripping life from the ancient woodlands, just as society stripped hope from her. She moved through the skeletal remains of once vibrant groves, her slender fingers tracing the desiccated bark, a silent prayer forming on her lips for a world that had never truly embraced her. This was her existence, a constant, agonizing whisper of what could have been, a life lived in the shadow of a kingdom that saw her only as a stain, forever an outsider in the land of her birth. The weight of her mixed blood was a constant ache, a heavy cloak woven from the threads of rejection and the deep-seated fear that she would never find a place where she truly belonged. Every sidelong glance, every hushed judgment, etched itself deeper into her spirit, reinforcing the truth that she was an eternal outsider. Yet, it was in the dying heart of this very forest, her only confidant, that Ilara found a fragile solace. Here, beneath the skeletal branches, she poured her soul into ancient, mournful songs, melodies forgotten by the elves who scorned her, but understood by the groaning earth. Her voice, a conduit of raw emotion and innate connection, wove through the decaying leaves, a desperate lament for the life that was fading and for the life she wished she could claim. Tell us where you are watching from in the comments and subscribe, because this story is just beginning. Now, let's continue. This hidden hope, a fierce desire to heal the land and be seen for the magic within her, pulsed beneath her sorrow. Her days were a relentless cycle of scavenging for meager sustenance, avoiding the scornful eyes of the occasional elven patrol, and battling the despair that threatened to consume her. The constant chill in the air, the scarcity of game, and the pervasive scent of decay were her familiar companions. She knew every gnarled root, every moss-covered stone, every whisper of the wind through the dying boughs. This ancient land, though slowly succumbing to the blight, was still her only home, her sanctuary, and her greatest burden. Within her, a secret hope persisted, a burning ember against the encroaching darkness. She believed, with a fierce, quiet certainty, that she held a key, a forgotten magic rooted in her unique heritage, that could somehow mend the fractured spirit of Eldoria. This wasn't merely a fantasy. It was a desperate, unyielding conviction, a reason to endure the relentless pain of her existence, even when the world offered her nothing but scorn. While Ilara wrestled with her personal desolation, the blight's insidious tendrils stretched far beyond the forgotten fringes, creeping relentlessly towards the heart of Eldoria. In the shimmering, ivory spires of the Elven capital, a world she could only imagine in fleeting, bitter dreams, the severity of the encroaching darkness was becoming undeniably clear. What began as a creeping malaise in the ancient groves now threatened the very essence of the Elven people, their revered magic and their ancient lineage. The colossal trees that once defined their realm were wilting into silent monuments of despair, their vibrant emerald hues fading to a sickly grey. The air, once thick with the scent of pine and life, now carried the pungent odour of decay, a stark reminder that time was rapidly running out. This wasn't merely an ecological disaster, it was a spiritual wound, a catastrophic unravelling of their entire world, pressing down on all, from the lowest outcast to the highest king. Then came the fateful, moonless night, a canvas of impenetrable darkness mirroring the despair that gripped the land. as the blight consumed yet another ancient sentinel, its colossal form collapsing with a mournful groan. Ilara's voice soared through the dying boughs. It was a desperate lament, a tapestry woven from forgotten melodies of life and renewal, potent with raw emotion and an innate connection to the suffering forest. Her song, a primal cry for healing, pierced the desolate quiet, carrying on the wind, defying the oppressive shadows. Far away, within his guarded chambers in the ivory capital, King Theron, a monarch burdened by prophecy and duty, heard every single word. Each note pulsated with a power he recognized as both ancient and desperately needed, a beacon in the encroaching gloom. An instinct he couldn't ignore stirred within him, a silent command from the dying land itself, suggesting that the forgotten half-elf's voice might just be the miracle his kingdom so desperately sought. After her desperate lament faded into the desolate quiet, Ilara felt a peculiar tremor in the air, a faint echo of the raw magic she had poured into the dying forest. Yet the fleeting sensation was quickly overshadowed by the familiar, heavy blanket of isolation that had been her constant companion since birth. Her earliest memories were not of a mother's embrace or a father's protective hand, but of chilling solitude and the silent, judging eyes of the few elves who ventured near the forgotten fringes. Their disdain, a sharp blade, had cut into her tender spirit, etching the truth of her abandonment deep into her soul. Her very existence felt like a mistake, a living testament to a heritage that brought only shame and rejection. How could she, a dark-skinned half-elf scorned by her own kind, ever hope for anything beyond this desolate existence? The idea of belonging, let alone being loved, was a cruel joke whispered by the wind through skeletal trees, a fantasy too painful to entertain. Her dark skin, a stark contrast to the ethereal pallor of pure-blooded elves, was a constant, visible brand of her otherness, a physical manifestation of the shame her very presence seemed to inflict upon Eldoria. This kingdom, obsessed with purity and ancient lineage, saw her mixed blood not as a unique blend, but as a dangerous stain, a deviation from their revered heritage. From her earliest consciousness, she had learned that her lineage wasn't just a difference. It was a curse, an insurmountable barrier that prevented any true connection. Every sidelong glance, every hushed conversation that abruptly ceased upon her approach, relentlessly reinforced the agonizing truth. She was an anomaly, an outcast, forever destined to walk alone. This ingrained prejudice had built impenetrable walls around her heart, making vulnerability a dangerous weakness she could ill afford, a luxury she had never known. Survival consumed her every waking moment, a relentless, grinding reality that overshadowed any personal desires. The dying forest, while her only sanctuary, offered meager sustenance, forcing her to hone a keen instinct for foraging and avoiding the creeping dangers that lurked in its decaying heart. There was no room in her life for frivolous dreams or tender affections. Every calorie, every breath was dedicated to simply existing, to warding off the encroaching despair, the constant battle against hunger, against the biting cold that seeped into her bones, and against the ever-present threat of the blight, left her emotionally drained, with no reserves left for the complexities of human connection. Her mournful songs, though born of the deepest emotion, were acts of solitary communion with the groaning earth, not invitations for the intimacy she believed she would never find. The very concept of romance, of being desired or cherished, felt alien and utterly unattainable to Ilara, a cruel mockery whispered by the wind. How could she, a creature deemed unworthy of even basic respect and acceptance, ever be worthy of love? The notion was a vision reserved for the pristine, high-born elves who graced the capital's shimmering halls, a world as distant as the stars. Her past was a litany of rejections, each one a nail hammered into the coffin of her fragile self-worth, solidifying the belief that she was fundamentally unlovable. To open her heart, to allow herself even a flicker of hope for such a profound connection, would be to invite another, even more devastating abandonment, a risk she simply could not bear to contemplate. The pain of potential loss was a far greater deterrent than the allure of an impossible dream. In the days following her powerful lament, an unusual energy seemed to stir within the dying forest, a palpable hum beneath the pervasive scent of decay. The air, though still heavy with sorrow, carried a faint, almost melodic resonance that made the fine hairs on her arms prickle. It was a sensation she had never experienced, a whisper of ancient magic stirring, a subtle shift in the very fabric of her desolate world. Yet, Elara, ever pragmatic and deeply scarred by a lifetime of disappointment, quickly dismissed it as a trick of her weary mind, a desperate hope conjured by the suffocating embrace of loneliness. Miracles did not happen to outcasts like her, only more struggle, more solitude. She had learned long ago not to trust such fleeting comforts, for they only intensified the subsequent, inevitable pain of their withdrawal. The fragile tranquility of her solitary vigil was abruptly shattered by the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and purposeful, unlike any creature of the dying forest. Through the skeletal branches, she glimpsed shimmering armor, the cold gleam of steel, and the imposing figures of elven warriors, their expressions grim and unyielding. They were the King's Guard, unmistakable in their pristine regalia, a sight she had only ever witnessed from a distance, usually as they patrolled with disdainful eyes. A cold dread coiled in her stomach, tightening its grip with each advancing step. What could they possibly want with her? A forgotten phantom of the woods, a creature deemed unworthy of notice. Their sudden authoritative presence here, in her secluded, blight-ridden sanctuary, felt like an ominous intrusion, a chilling prelude to something unsettling and terrifyingly official. Before Elara could fully react, they surrounded her, their faces impassive and unyielding, their movements precise and efficient. A leading warrior, his voice devoid of warmth or explanation, simply stated, "The king demands your presence. You will come." There was no room for refusal, no opportunity to question. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, as she was pulled, not roughly, but with an undeniable, chilling force, away from the only home she had ever known. She was led through the dying forest, its skeletal branches seeming to weep for her departure, towards a world she had only ever seen from the distant shadows, a world that had always rejected her. Confusion warred with a primal fear as she was propelled deeper into the untouched heart of Eldoria, towards the blinding, terrifying light of the capital, utterly bewildered by her sudden, inexplicable summons. On this channel, I bring the most epic and intense romance stories. Every week, a new world, a new impossible passion. Within the shimmering ivory spires of Eldoria's capital, King Theron stood a formidable silhouette against the stained glass window of his audience chamber, the fading light of the dying sun painting his regal features with a grim resolve. His silver hair, usually meticulously braided, now showed a few strands escaping, a subtle testament to the sleepless nights and the crushing weight of his crown. He was a figure of ancient power. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a weariness that belied his imposing stature, reflecting the encroaching blight that even here, in the heart of elven majesty, seemed to cast a long, suffocating shadow. The air, once vibrant with the hum of ancestral magic, now felt thin, almost brittle, a physical manifestation of the kingdom's slow decline, a burden he carried with stoic solitude, yet with a growing desperation. The Elven Council, a rigid assembly of ancient, tradition-bound nobles, had offered only platitudes and increasingly frantic, yet ineffective, rituals. Their whispers, usually a dull background hum of courtly intrigue, had escalated into desperate cries for a solution, each one echoing the mounting pressure on their king. Theron felt their eyes upon him, their unspoken accusations a heavy cloak of expectation. They saw only their revered monarch, not the man burdened by a prophecy foretelling a devastating end, nor the leader forced to consider options that defied every sacred tenet of their pure-blooded society. Their rigid adherence to lineage and their disdain for anything other had blinded them to true possibilities, trapping them in a gilded cage of self-importance. Beneath Theron's stoic facade, a profound loneliness gnawed at his spirit, a silent companion that had accompanied his reign for centuries. He was king, yes, but also a solitary guardian, watching his kingdom wither, his people slowly lose hope, the weight of his destiny, the fear of failing his ancestors and condemning Eldoria to oblivion, was a constant, suffocating presence. He had exhausted every traditional magical avenue, every political maneuver, yet the blight advanced relentlessly, a slow, agonizing death. His heart, a fortress of duty and resolve, ached with a quiet despair, a secret vulnerability he dared not show. For a king must always project unwavering strength, even when his soul was crumbling. It was in this crucible of despair that Ilara's lament had pierced the carefully constructed walls of his resolve, a raw, untamed melody weaving through the dying boughs of the forest and into his very soul. He recognized the ancient magic in her voice, a resonance that vibrated with the earth's deepest suffering and its forgotten potential for renewal. It was a power unlike any he had encountered, a stark contrast to the refined yet failing magic of his court. Her song was a desperate plea, but also a beacon, hinting at a connection to the land that transcended the rigid purity his people so revered. She was the anomaly, the outsider, yet the dying land itself had sung through her. His decision to summon her was not born of whim, but of a desperate, calculated gamble, a radical departure from millennia of tradition. He knew the scandal it would ignite, the outrage from his council, the whispers of sacrilege among the nobles. Marrying an outcast half-elf, a creature born of a forbidden union and scorned by their society, was an act of audacious defiance against everything Eldoria held sacred. Yet the prophecy, obscure and unsettling, spoke of a unique bond, a bridge between worlds, and Theron, with his kingdom teetering on the brink, had no other choice but to follow the desperate, ancient whispers that now led him to her. The order had been given, swift and absolute, echoing through the silent halls of his palace. His most trusted guards had been dispatched, their mission clear: bring the half-elf, Ilara, from the desolate fringes to the heart of his capital. He envisioned her confusion, her fear, perhaps even a flicker of defiance. She would undoubtedly believe she was being brought for punishment, unaware of the desperate pact he intended to propose. A union that would either save their dying world or condemn them both to an epic, shared ruin. He watched the moon climb, its pale light doing little to dispel the shadows in his chamber, as he awaited the arrival of the forgotten phantom, the unlikely key to Eldoria's salvation. The colossal gates of Eldoria's capital, shimmering with ancient magic, loomed before Ilara like a cruel mirage. A stark and terrifying contrast to the dying forest she had been torn from. The air here was thick with the scent of blossoming night flowers and polished stone, a suffocating perfume of wealth and purity that pressed down on her, highlighting her ragged clothes and dirt-streaked skin. Each step on the gleaming thoroughfare felt like a betrayal to the earth beneath her feet, the silent judgment of the pristine elves who lined the streets. Their elegant faces twisted in open disdain, a familiar agony. Her heart, a drum against her ribs, hammered with a mix of defiance and profound terror. She was a captured wild thing, dragged into a gilded cage, bewildered and raw, bracing herself for the inevitable punishment she believed awaited her, a fate she had always known would be harsh. Led through a labyrinth of opulent corridors, past tapestries depicting ancient elven glories and statues of revered ancestors, Ilara felt the weight of centuries of tradition pressing down on her, a physical force threatening to crush her spirit. Every ornate detail, every whisper of silk from a passing noble, emphasized her profound otherness, solidifying the belief that she was an anomaly in this world. Then she was ushered into a vast chamber, bathed in the soft glow of enchanted crystals, where King Theron stood, a figure of formidable power and regal authority. His gaze, piercing and intense, swept over her, a silent assessment that left her breathless, a strange tremor passing through her. A dangerous magnetism hummed between them, an unexpected spark in the frigid air of the court, hinting at a connection she couldn't comprehend. If these kinds of stories captivate you, subscribe, because I have many more. Theron's voice, deep and resonant, cut through the heavy silence, devoid of the expected condemnation, yet laced with an undeniable gravity. The blight that consumes our forests, he began, his eyes fixed on her, is not merely an ecological wound. It is a spiritual rot, an ancient curse that threatens to unravel the very fabric of Eldoria, stripping away our magic, our lineage, our very existence. He spoke of the Elven Council's futile efforts, their rituals failing, their wisdom proving hollow against an enemy that defied their understanding. His words painted a vivid picture of a kingdom teetering on the precipice, a proud people facing an agonizing, slow death, and a king burdened by a loneliness that echoed her own, despite the chasm of their stations. He then revealed the true depth of his predicament, a secret he had guarded with his very soul. An ancient prophecy, he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, speaks of a unique bond, a bridge between worlds, a union of disparate bloodlines that alone can mend the fractured spirit of our land. His gaze intensified, stripping away her defenses, making her feel seen in a way no one ever had. He explained how her lament, so potent with raw, untamed magic, had vibrated with the earth's deepest suffering and its forgotten potential for renewal, confirming her as the linchpin of this obscure, desperate foretelling. The weight of his words settled upon her, a heavy, unexpected mantle, transforming her from a scorned outcast into a vital, terrifying enigma. Then came the audacious, almost sacrilegious proposition that shattered the last vestiges of her comprehension. To fulfill this prophecy, Theron declared, his voice firm, though a flicker of vulnerability crossed his eyes, to harness your innate connection to the forest and save Eldoria, I propose a marriage of convenience. Not for love, but for survival. A desperate pact born of necessity, intended to forge an alliance between an outcast and a king. He offered her protection from the prejudice that had plagued her life, a place within the court, and the resources of the entire kingdom to combat the blight, painting a future where her unique heritage could be a source of strength, not shame. Ilara's mind reeled, a maelstrom of shock and disbelief. Marriage to a king. The concept was so utterly alien, so wildly improbable. It felt like a cruel jest. Her past, a litany of rejections and profound abandonment, screamed in protest. How could she, a creature deemed unworthy of even basic respect, enter into such a sacred union? The thought of being bound to this powerful, enigmatic man, of navigating the treacherous currents of his court, ignited a primal fear within her, a terror of being exposed, of failing, of being cast aside once more, this time from an even greater height. Yet, as she met his unwavering gaze, a different kind of truth began to emerge. Theron, sensing her hesitation, pressed on, not with demands, but with a quiet, desperate plea that resonated deep within her wounded spirit. He spoke of the vast libraries of ancient lore she could access, the forgotten elixirs, the powerful artifacts. He promised her not just safety, but the means to truly heal the dying forest, to unleash the dormant magic within her to its fullest potential. It was an offer that transcended personal desire, a chance to fulfill the fierce, secret hope that had sustained her through a lifetime of sorrow, a purpose grander than anything she had ever dared to dream. A profound silence descended upon the chamber, heavy with the weight of their converging destinies. Elara, her heart still hammering, saw not just a king, but a man burdened by an impossible choice, mirroring her own desperate hope for the land. The echoes of the dying forest whispered through her, urging her forward. She took a breath, a silent acknowledgement of the terrifying leap she was about to make, her voice, though trembling, infused with a newfound resolve that surprised even herself. "I accept," she stated, her eyes locking with his, a fierce glint igniting within their depths, "but only on one condition: my magic, my methods, will not be questioned. And the first step must be to bring life back to the most ancient, most blighted groves, the ones closest to my home." The arrangements were swift, almost brutally so, a testament to King Theron's desperate urgency and the kingdom's precarious state. There was no grand procession, no elaborate feast, only a hushed gathering in a smaller, somber hall far from the main audience chambers. The air itself seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, heavy with the scent of ancient incense and the weight of centuries of elven tradition being strained to its breaking point. Elara, clad in simple, borrowed silks that felt alien against her skin, stood before the king, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Every polished surface, every shimmering crystal reflected her profound unease, a stark reminder of the chasm between her desolate past and this terrifying, gilded present. She was a pawn in a game she barely understood, bound by a desperate hope for a dying land and a silent prayer that she wouldn't shatter under the immense pressure. The ceremony itself was a stark, almost brutal affair, stripped bare of any joyous pretense. It was a binding, a solemn pact witnessed by a handful of grim-faced counselors and loyal guards. Theron, his regal bearing unwavering, placed a hand upon an ancient glowing orb, its magic pulsating faintly, and recited vows that spoke not of love, but of duty, of sacrifice, and of the survival of Eldoria. Elara, her own hand trembling slightly, mirrored his gesture, her voice a low, steady murmur as she swore to protect the land and its people, her gaze meeting his with a fierce, quiet resolve. The Elven Council, a phalanx of rigid faces and hushed whispers, could barely conceal their disdain, their eyes burning with a mixture of outrage and a morbid curiosity, each silent judgment a physical blow against her fragile composure. News of the king's unprecedented union spread like wildfire through the capital, igniting a storm of shock and disbelief that rippled through every stratum of elven society. In the bustling marketplaces, the whispers were sharp, laced with outrage and contempt for the dark-skinned outsider who had dared to sully their revered lineage. Elegant nobles in their shimmering estates exchanged disdainful glances, their hushed conversations filled with veiled threats and prophecies of doom. Lady Aerith, a distant royal cousin whose own ambitions for the throne and for King Theron had been thwarted, watched from a shadowed balcony, her delicate features twisted into a mask of venomous envy, her mind already plotting the half-elf's inevitable downfall. The collective judgment of Eldoria pressed down on Elara, a suffocating weight of prejudice. Internally, Elara wrestled with a maelstrom of conflicting emotions, the weight of the silk on her skin, the heavy scent of incense, the chilling stares of the court. All of it felt profoundly unreal, a dream from which she desperately wished to awaken. Her past, A relentless litany of rejections and profound abandonment screamed in protest against this sudden, forced acceptance. How could she, a creature deemed unworthy of even basic respect, now stand as queen? Her hands, usually calloused from foraging, felt strangely delicate and alien beneath the borrowed fabric, trembling almost imperceptibly. A cold dread coiled in her stomach, a persistent fear that this fragile truce was merely a prelude to an even more devastating fall, a grander rejection from a height she could scarcely fathom. Theron, for his part, maintained a facade of unwavering stoicism, his gaze fixed on Elara with an intensity that seemed to strip away her defenses. The immense pressure of his crown, the desperate gamble he had taken, manifested only in the subtle tightening of his jaw and the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand as he held the ancient orb. His eyes, usually cool and remote, held a flicker of something more, a profound weariness, perhaps, or a nascent curiosity, a recognition of the desperate hope they both carried for Eldoria. In that moment, a dangerous, unexpected current of understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of their shared burden, a fragile spark in the frigid air of the court that defied all reason and expectation. As the final words of the pact were spoken, a formal hand-holding was required, a symbolic gesture to seal their union before the silent day judging assembly. Theron's hand, large and surprisingly warm, encompassed hers, a stark contrast to her own trembling fingers. It was meant to be purely ceremonial, a public display of unity, yet the contact sent an unexpected jolt through Elara, a strange, undeniable current of energy that prickled her skin. Her breath hitched, a silent gasp caught in her throat, as her eyes, wide with surprise, met his. In that brief, charged moment, the formality of the court faded, replaced by an intimate awareness of their shared touch, a dangerous tremor that hinted at something far more profound than mere duty. Then came the gesture that shattered the fragile illusion of their purely political arrangement. As their hands remained clasped, ostensibly for the final signatures on the ancient parchment, Theron's thumb, with a feather-light touch, traced a delicate pattern on the back of her hand. It was an almost imperceptible movement, too subtle for the distant observers to notice, yet for Elara it was a searing spark, a silent promise whispered directly to her soul, a shiver, not of fear but of an unfamiliar, potent sensation, ran through her. This was not the touch of a king to his subject, nor a ruler to his political bride. It was something far more intimate, far more dangerous, hinting at a connection that defied the cold logic of their pact. The subtle brush of his thumb ignited a firestorm within Elara, a dizzying surge of emotions she had long suppressed. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm that echoed the unexpected tremor in her soul. It was a jolt of recognition, a dangerous awareness of the man beneath the crown, a primal response to a touch she had never dared to dream of. Theron's gaze, which had remained unwavering, now held a deeper intensity, a flicker of something unreadable in its depths. For a fleeting moment, the oppressive silence of the hall seemed to fall away, and only the hum of their shared, charged connection existed. A silent acknowledgement that this agreement, this forced union, was already spiraling beyond their carefully constructed control. The formal part of the ceremony concluded, but the tension in the chamber only intensified. The councillors, though outwardly composed, exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the subtle shift in the air, the new, dangerous dynamic between their stoic king and the enigmatic half-elf. Elara felt the weight of Theron's presence beside her, a magnetic pull that was both terrifying and undeniably alluring. Their proximity, once a matter of political necessity, now felt charged with an unspoken question, a dangerous promise of what might lie ahead. Every breath she took was shallow, every beat of her heart a testament to the precarious precipice upon which they now stood, bound by a pact that felt less like an agreement and more like an irrevocable surrender. As the final, ancient words of the binding oath resonated through the hall, sealing their fate before the silent, judging court, Theron turned to Ilara. His gaze, a storm of duty and an unreadable emotion, held hers captive. Slowly, deliberately, he leaned in, his breath warm against her cheek, and his lips met hers in a kiss that was meant to be purely ceremonial, a public affirmation of their union. But the moment their mouths connected, a powerful surge of ancient magic, intertwined with a raw, undeniable current of emotion, coursed through them both, a silent, breathtaking explosion that shattered the carefully constructed facade of their political pact, leaving them both reeling, utterly exposed, and irrevocably bound by a destiny far grander and more perilous than either had ever conceived. Dale, li que si ya te enganchaste, y suscríbete para más romances épicos. The ceremonial kiss had been a shock, a sudden, potent jolt that had left Ilara breathless and disoriented, shattering the fragile composure she had painstakingly built. Now, standing beside King Theron in the echoing silence of the royal chambers, the weight of her new title, Queen, felt like an ill-fitting shroud. The opulent fabrics, the whispered reverence of the few servants assigned to her, all felt profoundly alien. She moved through the palace as if in a dream, her senses overwhelmed by the unfamiliar scents of rare perfumes and polished stone, a stark contrast to the earthy decay of her forest home. Every mirror seemed to reflect a stranger, a woman caught in a gilded cage, her dark skin a stark declaration of her otherness amidst the pale, pristine elves. The quiet agony of her abandonment, a constant companion, now morphed into a new, terrifying form of isolation, a profound loneliness amplified by the very grandeur that surrounded her. She yearned for the biting wind, the familiar groans of the dying trees, anything but this suffocating, unsettling pretense. Her days in the palace were a delicate dance of forced grace and simmering anxiety. She would often find herself drawn to the tallest windows, gazing out at the distant verdant canopy of the forest, a painful reminder of the world she had lost and the world she was now bound to save. The meticulously manicured royal gardens, though beautiful, felt sterile and lifeless compared to the wild, untamed groves she knew. Servants, though outwardly respectful, carried an air of subtle disdain, their eyes flicking over her with a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled contempt. She could hear their hushed whispers, the murmurs of outsider, forest witch, the king's folly weaving through the grand halls like insidious tendrils, reinforcing the truth that no title, no crown, could erase the stigma of her birth. Even in her new, elevated station, the biting chill of prejudice remained a constant, unwelcome companion, a relentless reminder that she was still fundamentally alone. The Elven Council meetings were a crucible of barely concealed hostility, a weekly ordeal where Ilara felt the collective weight of centuries of tradition pressing down upon her. During one particularly tense session, as she presented her initial findings on the Blight's unique magical signature, Lord Valerius, an ancient, silver-haired noble whose eyes held a perpetual glint of suspicion, scoffed openly. "Her methods," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension, "are nothing more than savage, untamed rituals, born of ignorance, not true elven magic. How can we trust the fate of Eldoria to the crude incantations of a half-blood when our own revered law has failed?" His words were a public humiliation, a deliberate attempt to undermine her authority and expose her perceived weaknesses, igniting a familiar ache of rejection deep within Ilara's soul. She felt the eyes of the other counselors upon her, a silent chorus of judgment. Theron, however, remained impassive, His gaze a steel-cold barrier against Valerius's venom, yet he did not immediately intervene. It was only after the council meeting, as they walked in a strained silence through a secluded gallery adorned with ancient tapestries, that he finally spoke. "Their fear clouds their judgment," he murmured, his voice low and unexpectedly gentle, a stark contrast to the public formality. He turned to her, his eyes, usually so guarded, holding a flicker of something akin to understanding. He gestured towards a tapestry depicting an ancient elven hero. Even the greatest among us once faced skepticism. A subtle, almost imperceptible brush of his hand against hers as he pointed, a fleeting, dangerous contact sent a shiver through Ilara. In that moment, surrounded by the ghosts of elven history, a fragile bridge of unspoken acknowledgement began to form between them, a dangerous spark in the cold, formal expanse of their arranged union. Driven by a desperate urgency and her unwavering connection to the land, Ilara began her work on the blight. She eschewed the sterile, refined magical techniques of the elven mages, instead venturing into the royal gardens, areas traditionally untouched by her people's magic, and even, secretly, to the edges of the blighted forest. There, she would stand barefoot upon the parched earth, her dark skin absorbing the raw energy of the dying world. Her voice, a mournful echo of her past laments, would weave ancient, forgotten melodies, not merely to charm, but to directly communicate with the suffering trees, coaxing a faint, green luminescence from their desiccated bark. It was a slow, agonizing process, each flicker of life a small victory. But her methods, primal and deeply intuitive, were a stark affront to the rigid traditions of the elven court, drawing both hushed awe from the few who witnessed them and renewed disdain from the council. The whispers and veiled insults escalated, culminating in a public incident during a rare royal banquet meant to showcase unity. Lady Aerith, a distant royal cousin whose delicate features belied a viper's venom, approached Ilara with a saccharine smile, a glass of shimmering elven wine in her hand. "My queen," she purred, her voice carrying just loud enough for the surrounding nobles to hear, "I do hope the palace fare suits your rustic tastes. One must imagine the transition from foraging for roots to such delicacies is quite the adjustment for one of your unique upbringing." A ripple of snickers spread through the assembled guests, their eyes darting between Ilara's flushed face and Aerith's triumphant smirk. The humiliation was a burning brand, twisting the knife of her past rejections, threatening to shatter her fragile composure in front of the entire court, exposing her raw vulnerability. Before Ilara could formulate a response, a silence fell over the hall, profound and immediate, as King Theron stepped forward, his presence radiating an icy authority that silenced every whisper. His eyes, usually a calm winter sky, now blazed with a fierce, protective fire as he fixed his gaze upon Lady Aerith. Lady Aerith, his voice, though low, resonated with an undeniable power. The Queen's heritage is a matter of pride, not ridicule. Her connection to Eldoria runs deeper than any lineage you boast, for she speaks the language of the very earth we stand upon. I suggest you remember that, lest you forget your place." The rebuke was sharp, public, and absolute. Ilara felt a tremor pass through her, not of fear, but of a profound, unexpected relief. A warmth spreading through her chest at his unwavering defense. His gaze met hers for a fleeting moment, a silent promise of protection that transcended the formal boundaries of their pact. Later that evening, in the quiet solitude of her chambers, the image of Theron's fierce defense replayed in Ilara's mind, a powerful balm against the sting of Aerith's cruelty. She touched her lips, remembering the ceremonial kiss, then her hand where his thumb had traced a pattern. Was this merely a king protecting his asset, his chosen instrument for salvation? Or was there something more, a nascent thread of genuine care weaving itself into the fabric of their forced union? The lines blurred, the meticulously constructed facade of their political arrangement beginning to crack under the weight of his unexpected protection. A dangerous question formed in her heart, a whisper that echoed in the silent room. Are we really just pretending? The thought, both terrifying and exhilarating, stirred a longing she had long believed dead, a yearning for connection that defied all reason and the bitter lessons of her past. In the days that followed, a subtle shift occurred in their interactions. Theron began to seek Elara out, not merely for updates on the Blight, but for quiet conversations in the palace's secluded alcoves or during late-night walks through the moonlit gardens. He spoke of ancient lore, of the burdens of kingship, and she, in turn, shared her intuitive understanding of the forest's suffering, her voice losing its habitual tremor in his presence. There were moments, a shared glance over a forgotten scroll, his hand lingering fractionally longer than necessary when passing her a cup of herbal tea, the subtle softening of his stern features when she spoke passionately of the land that hinted at a growing intimacy, a fragile connection forging itself in the crucible of their shared desperation. The air between them, once purely formal, now hummed with a dangerous, unspoken current, an attraction neither dared to acknowledge. Yet, the respite was fleeting. The Elven Council, still wary of Elara's unconventional magic and fueled by Lady Aerith's continued machinations, renewed their offensive. They argued that while some minor groves showed improvement, the Blight's core remained untouched, and her methods were too unpredictable, too wild. Lord Valerius, emboldened by a faction of conservative nobles, openly demanded a demonstration of her power under strict magical supervision, hinting that her unique connection might be a source of the Blight itself rather than its cure. The accusation, laced with ancient prejudice against mixed blood, struck Elara like a physical blow. She felt the familiar walls of suspicion closing in, the suffocating weight of their doubt threatening to crush the fragile hope that had begun to bloom within her. The palace, with all its grandeur, once again felt like a prison. Theron, sensing the escalating pressure and the deep wound the council's words inflicted, met with Elara in his private study, a room filled with ancient maps and the scent of aged parchment. He did not dismiss her fears, but met her gaze with an unwavering resolve. Their distrust is born of fear, Elara, fear of what they do not understand, of what challenges their rigid world. His voice was firm, yet held an undercurrent of profound trust. You are the only hope. I will not allow them to impede your work. I will shield you from their venom. It was not a public declaration, but a quiet, powerful reaffirmation of his faith in her, a personal vow that solidified the bond between them, strengthening her resolve even as the external storms raged. His belief, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, was a dangerous comfort, deepening the intricate web of their connection. But even Theron's protection could not entirely stem the tide of ancient traditions. A decree, unearthed from forgotten archives by Lord Valerius and backed by a significant faction of the council, now demanded a rite of lineage, a grand, public ceremony designed to validate the Queen's magical purity and suitability to bear an heir. The implications were chilling. Failure would mean not only Elara's public disgrace and potential banishment, but also the annulment of their marriage, shattering Eldoria's last hope. The ceremony, scheduled for the next full moon, was a trap, a political maneuver disguised as tradition, designed to expose her perceived flaws and sever her connection to the king forever. The weight of this new, terrifying challenge descended upon Elara, a suffocating premonition of doom, threatening to unravel everything they had fought to build, plunging them both into an abyss of uncertainty. The decree for the rite of lineage had cast a suffocating shadow over the palace, chilling the fragile warmth that had begun to bloom between Elara and Theron. Elara retreated into a desolate silence, the weight of the council's demands triggering every raw nerve of her past rejections. She felt the familiar sting of being an object, a means to an end, rather than a person. Theron, too, grew distant, his kingly facade hardening, his gaze often lost in thought, avoiding hers. The carefully constructed intimacy of their stolen moments vanished, replaced by a chasm of unspoken fears and the suffocating pressure of an impossible future. She could feel his internal struggle, a silent battle mirroring her own, yet his inability to confide in her, to truly acknowledge her terror, drove a wedge deeper between them, threatening to unravel the precarious trust they had begun to build amidst the court's venom. The air in their shared chambers crackled with unspoken tension, thick with the scent of impending doom. One night, as a storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in Elara's soul, she confronted him in his study, her voice trembling with a blend of fear and accusation. "What is this rite truly about, Theron? They speak of lineage, of heirs, but I feel a darker purpose." His eyes, usually guarded, now held a profound weariness, a flicker of vulnerability she hadn't seen since their first meeting. He confessed, his voice a low, strained whisper. "The prophecy, Elara. It is not merely about an heir. It speaks of a queen, one of mixed blood, who must undergo a purification ritual at the height of the Blight's power. It demands a sacrifice, a channeling of primal magic so profound, it could either save Eldoria or consume the one who wields it." The council, he revealed, had a deadline, an ancient celestial alignment that would pass, taking with it their last chance, their last hope. Elara reeled, the cruel truth, a physical blow that left her breathless. "A sacrifice," she choked, her voice laced with betrayal. "You brought me here to be a sacrificial lamb, to be used and discarded once my magic is drained." Her past abandonment, her deepest fear, screamed into existence. She felt the chill of being utterly alone, utterly expendable. Theron's face contorted with agony, a raw, unkingly expression. "No, Elara, never that," he pleaded, reaching for her, his hand falling short. "I sought to protect you, to find another way, but the council, they interpret the ancient texts rigidly. They believe it is the only way." His moral dilemma was stark. Tell her the full, terrifying truth and risk her rejection, or continue the pretense, leading her unwittingly to a potentially fatal destiny. The weight of his crown, the lives of his people, pressed down on him, suffocating his personal desires. "Dear, you lied to me," Elara cried, her voice cracking with a pain that echoed through the vast chamber. "You spoke of purpose, of healing, but you knew all along this was my fate." Tears, hot and furious, streamed down her cheeks, blurring the image of his anguished face. "How could you? After everything, after you defended me, after those stolen moments when I almost believed—" She trailed off, unable to voice the dangerous hope she had nurtured. The nascent feelings that now felt brutally crushed. Theron stepped closer, his own eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Elara, I never meant to deceive you. I would give anything to spare you this, to take this burden myself. But I cannot. You are the only one. And if I lose you to this ritual, if Eldoria falls, a part of me, a part I never knew existed, will fall with it." His words, almost a declaration of love, hung heavy in the air, a devastating admission. The raw honesty of his confession, the tremor in his voice as he spoke of losing a part of himself, pierced Elara's defenses, even as her heart ached with betrayal. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw not just a king, but a man drowning in a sea of impossible choices, his shoulders burdened by a despair that mirrored her own. "And what if I refuse?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet filled with a fierce defiance. What if I choose to save myself after a lifetime of being sacrificed? Theron's hand finally found hers, his touch a searing brand amidst the emotional wreckage. Then Eldoria dies, he stated, his voice devoid of anger, only profound sorrow, and with it the chance for either of us to ever truly belong, to ever truly live. This isn't just about the kingdom, Ilara. It's about us, about the impossible hope we ignited. His thumb stroked her knuckles, a familiar, dangerous comfort. The morning of the rite arrived, cloaked in a heavy fog that seemed to mirror the uncertainty in their hearts. The grand assembly hall, usually reserved for coronations and treaties, now buzzed with a tense, expectant energy. Nobles, councillors, and even common folk had gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and thinly veiled malice, all eager witnesses to the king's controversial union. Ilara, her face a mask of regal composure, walked beside Theron, her hand resting lightly on his arm, a public display of unity that belied the chasm of their private anguish. His touch was a silent anchor, a desperate plea. As they reached the dais, the high priest, his voice booming, declared, "Let the rite of lineage commence, and with it the king shall make an announcement that will forever shape the destiny of Eldoria and of our new queen." The world held its breath. The high priest's declaration echoed through the grand assembly hall, each word a hammer blow against the fragile silence, sealing the fate of the rite of lineage. Ilara stood beside Theron, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, the heavy velvet of her gown feeling like a shroud rather than regalia. She could feel the weight of 1,000 expectant gazes, a palpable mixture of hope, judgment, and thinly veiled malice from the assembled nobles and common folk. Lady Aerith, positioned prominently with Lord Valerius, wore a triumphant, venomous smirk, her eyes glinting with the certainty of Ilara's public downfall. This was the moment of truth, the precipice upon which Eldoria teetered, and Ilara braced herself, not for salvation, but for the inevitable humiliation she had been taught to expect, the final, crushing rejection from a world that had never truly wanted her. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a suffocating premonition of the storm about to break. Then Theron stepped forward, his kingly presence radiating an absolute authority that momentarily silenced every murmur, every whispered doubt. His gaze, usually guarded, now burned with an unwavering resolve, sweeping across the assembly before settling fiercely on Ilara. "The prophecy," he declared, his voice deep and resonant, resonating with ancient power, "speaks not of sacrifice, but of a unique bond, a true union between disparate bloodlines. It speaks of a chosen queen, whose heart and magic are intrinsically linked to the land, a true mate destined not to be consumed, but to heal Eldoria, to restore its spirit." He extended a hand to Ilara, his eyes locking with hers, a silent, profound confession passing between them. "And Ilara, my queen, she is that destined bond, the bridge between our world and its salvation. I choose her, not merely as my queen, but as my partner, my equal, the very heart of this kingdom's rebirth." A collective gasp rippled through the stunned court. The raw power of Theron's declaration, his unwavering faith, shattered the last vestiges of Ilara's fear, igniting a fierce, exhilarating resolve deep within her. Her breath hitched, a silent sob of profound relief and burgeoning love caught in her throat. She met his gaze, her own eyes now blazing with a newfound courage, a reflection of the powerful magic stirring within her, no longer just a burden, but a source of undeniable strength. Stepping forward, she took his outstretched hand, her fingers intertwining with his in a grip that was both delicate and unyielding. "I accept this destiny," she affirmed, her voice clear and strong, resonating with the ancient melodies that flowed through her veins, "not as a sacrifice, but as a sacred pledge. to heal our dying land, and to stand by you, my king, in this shared impossible hope." As their hands clasped firmly, Theron leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was no longer ceremonial, but a breathtaking explosion of ancient magic and undeniable passion, sealing their true union for all of Eldoria to witness. A collective gasp of shock, followed by a cacophony of outraged whispers, erupted through the hall. Lord Valerius's face contorted in a mask of furious disbelief, while Lady Aerith's saccharine smile finally dissolved into a sneer of pure, unadulterated venom. But Ilara and Theron stood firm, their hands still clasped, their eyes locked, a silent, fierce defiance radiating from their united front. The kiss, an audacious act of love and defiance, had sent a ripple of potent, restorative magic through the assembly hall, a subtle hum that quieted even the most fervent dissenters, a silent testament to the prophecy's true fulfillment. In that moment, surrounded by a court still reeling from the revelation, they were not just king and queen, but two souls irrevocably bound, ready to face any challenge. Their love a beacon against the encroaching darkness, a promise to our community of a new, hopeful beginning. The blight receded, a whisper of a nightmare fading before the dawn, as life surged anew through Eldoria's ancient heart, tendrils of vibrant green reclaiming the desiccated bark. Ilara, now truly queen, walked hand in hand with Theron through vibrant groves, their laughter a testament to a love that had mended a broken world. Their shared touch, once a political necessity, became a daily solace, a silent promise of a future woven from impossible hope, forever bound by the forest's whispers and the strength of their unified hearts. This story ends, but there are many more epic romances waiting for you among the other stories on the channel. Next week, the ancient, forgotten magic of the Shadow Weavers will stir in the deepest caves, and our beloved protagonists will face something even more dangerous than the blight, threatening the fragile peace they fought so hard to secure. Dale like si esta historia te atrapó, porque tu apoyo es vital para que nuestra comunidad siga creciendo y para que más romances épicos como este cobren vida semana tras semana. Suscríbete para la próxima aventura y no te pierdas cómo nuestros héroes enfrentarán nuevos desafíos, uniendo sus destinos a los de nuestros suscriptores en cada nueva entrega. Comenta qué momento te impactó más, qué personaje te conmovió o qué giro de la trama te sorprendió, para que nosotros podamos seguir trayendo las historias que más te apasionan. There are many other stories on the channel, each one a journey into the heart of an impossible passion, waiting for you to dive in. May their love, forged in fire and faith, forever bloom in the heart of Eldoria.